So today's topic of the webinar, although the center is hosting this is one of those TA collaboratives where American University is going to present to you an overview of their racial and ethnic disparities assessment tool. So I will be handing it over to them. I just want to mention a few kind of logistical inputs. If there are any questions, you can use the chat box. We are monitoring the chat box on this side. So we will supply AU with those questions so that they can respond to those questions in an appropriate manner. So feel free to ask any questions, and we'll take care of that and make sure that happens. We are recording the webinar, so it will be available for those who either jump on late or want to share it with staffers, or who might not be able to join us today. So those are just a few logistical setups that I wanted to mention beforehand. Anything else? Just so that you know, there's a huge, here at the center, our whole team is in the room, so just wanted to kind of let you know that AJ, who is in charge of webinars, Alejandra, she is here, and she's the one that organizes and is running it, along with Naja, who you all are familiar with, because Naja is the one that sends all of those wonderful emails out, these email blasts that we send you all the time. And then a few other team members are here too. There's Stephanie, and you all probably met them at the conference. Stephanie and Monica, Sheila, Kelly, Adele, and Noelle are all here. It's a very female-dominated space right now. and David should be online. I think that he's online. So be mindful, too, that once the presentation starts, that you should keep your computers on mute so we don't get any real background noise as the presenters are going through the presentation. So I'm going to give a quick bio of our three presenters from American University. You are all pretty familiar with them, but I just want to kind of give a quick bio of them. It will be Preeti Menon, Leola Abraham, and Zephyr Francis are our three presenters today. And I'll start with Preeti, who we all love and adore. She's the Senior Associate Director of the Justice Programs Office for American University, and she's been in that position for 5 years. She has close to 20 years of extensive experience working in drug courts, including adult drug courts, juvenile drug courts, and family drug courts. She is passionate about bringing collaboration and communication as important basis for the success of any initiative. She's also the project director of BJ's National Drug Court Resource Center and OJDP's Juvenile Drug Court TTA. Prior to working at OPJ, Preeti was the Director of Justice for 8 years and worked at both BJA and OJDP. At BJA, she was the policy advisor for adjudication, working primarily with problem-solving courts, and while at OJDP, she oversaw research components of the Tribal Youth Program and worked with OJDP's Drug-Free Communities Coalition Initiative. Leola Abraham is Associate Director of Communications for JPO's Office of Research Center in the American University School of Public Affairs. She is a Senior Communications Practitioner with 19 years of experience working with businesses, universities, nonprofits, and government leaders to deliver communication strategies to build awareness and manage reputations. Her expertise includes global campaigns, public relations, media relations, strategy development, brand management, and project management for technology products. Zephyr Francis is a research associate at American University's JPO. His research interests include racial and ethnic disparities in the criminal justice system, alternatives to mass incarceration, drug and alcohol use, and implementing evidence-based practices. At JPO, Zephyr is part of the National Drug Court Resource Center, an innovative charge that provides treatment court professionals with resources to enable their programs to operate as effectively as possible. He also manages the National Drug Court Resource Center treatment court surveys, which collect information on courts across the country, their operations, and their target populations. Zephyr previously worked as a research associate at George Mason University, and while at George Mason, he conducted research on reentry. So I will turn over the presentation to the team at AU. Preeti, you can start.
Thanks, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before we actually start our presentation, I just wanted to mention that we're still waiting for an OMB approval for the drug court surveys, which include the state coordinator surveys, the local drug court surveys, and the survey for healing to wellness courts. And we're working with BJ on following up with OMB on this. Also, the second drug court review featuring innovative approaches for the treatment court field will be released this month, so please look out for it and share it with everyone that you know. All right, and I know most of you on the call, and some of you were at our session for this program assessment tool at the NADCP conference in July. So just want to mention that during this session, there was a healthy discussion around the usability of the tool. And one of our panelists, which included someone from one of our pilot sites in North Carolina, one of the things he said was that during the session, he said, the tool actually provided their court a space to hold a much needed discussion around race and equity. So it was a good starting point for them. And we got a similar comment from another session participant that they were glad to have a starting point in form of this, in type of this tool in order to address racial and ethnic disparities within their drug court. So we felt like this was positive step towards addressing RAD within the tool, within the treatment courts. And so for today's presentation, our goal is to give you all an overview of the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Program Assessment Tool. Our hope is that you'll walk away with our presentation and feel comfortable talking about the tool with your networks and encourage treatment courts in your state to complete the tool. The tool has been live for roughly 4 weeks now, so it is available. And Zephi is going to go through how your courts can, how your courts can request a login and whatnot. Right, so I just go down. Sorry, just technical difficulties. Okay, so yeah, this is what our session is going to look like. We're doing some introductory remarks right now. I will mention that our team, the JPO team who worked in-house, includes myself and Zephi Francis and Leola Abraham. And also we had quite a good, very much involved working committee as well, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I'll go through the role of the working committee in creation of this tool. And Zephi will, Zephi will go over the tool itself and provide you with a snapshot, and Leola will talk through the RAD tools communications plan, and then we'll have some Q&A session to wrap up. All right. So we began this initiative with a strong working committee. We had input from folks from BJA, and also we did our own search for folks that we felt comfortable who would, create a strong working committee. The committee had an active input into the questionnaires, including the framing of the questions. We held like an all-day working committee meeting to go through the tool in details. So just rest assured, it was vetted thoroughly by folks out in the field and people who've been working on this topic. The first person listed on here, Julie Baldwin, she is our Associate Director of Research here at Justice Programs Office, and she specializes in translational and evaluation research, which focus mainly on treatment courts itself. Evan Elkins, many of you may know, is he's the Executive Director of Reclaiming Futures. Zephi Francis was just introduced. He's our Research Associate at American University. John Gallagher, you may have also heard from at the conference. He is an Associate Professor in the School of Social Work at Indiana University. And he's been working on racial disparities for a while now. In fact, he contributed to, in addition to being part of our working committee, he also contributed to the issue brief that was released last month. So if you haven't seen that, please go to ndcrc.org and check it out. And then myself and Daryl Turpin, he's the co-principal investigator for Heat Time. He's also the principal investigator for clinical research with young Black men in the criminal justice system. So with that, I'm gonna have Zephi provide you with a snapshot of the tool.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. I'm elated to be here to discuss the RED Program Assessment Tool. As we think about the justice system here in the US, it has been structured in such a way that extends fairly robust rights to the privileged while denying these same rights to the poor and members of minority groups. A quote from this book called No Equal Justice captures this sentiment. This book was published 20 years ago, but the truth in this statement remains. Addressing RED is important. Almost a decade ago, the board of directors at NADCP passed a resolution directing treatment courts to examine their programs to find out if disparities exist for racial and ethnic minorities. The rationale behind this call to action was to motivate treatment courts to first identify problems and then for courts to make changes to enhance outcomes for minority participants. I love this image because it does a good job at illustrating the difference between equality and equity. On the left side, regardless of their height, everyone is given the same step stool. On the right, the height of the individual determines the height of the step stool. Some individuals in the justice system are going to need extra support to get up to speed with participants who are from more privileged backgrounds. I believe that we all have a role and responsibility to create a justice system that is fair for all people. Whether you are a practitioner, researcher, policymaker, or a concerned citizen, it is our duty to ensure that everyone is treated fairly in the justice system, regardless of their race or ethnic background. People of color are more likely to be arrested, detained, convicted, and given harsher sentences than their white counterparts. Historically, there has been a racial element to drug laws and policies here in the US. Thinking back to the late 1800s, during the construction of the railroads, there were restrictions and penalties enforced for opium use, with Chinese immigrant workers were more likely to engage in this drug use. Then in the early 1900s, marijuana was made illegal and Blacks and Mexicans were the primary users of this drug. Regarding police, some scholars argue that modern day policing in the US emerged out of slavery. Slave patrols were created to track down runaway slaves or to prevent slaves from even thinking about escaping. One of the most visible disparities that is often highlighted is the proportion of minorities who are serving time behind bars. In 2015, the US Census estimated the national population to be around 321 million. Let's just look at the white and Black populations. Whites made up about 61% of the population and Blacks 13% of the population. However, when you look at the percent of individuals in state or federal correctional facilities, for whites, there's 34% and Blacks 35%. There is a disparity present. One could imagine that people of color will be less trusting of the court system due to the disparities in the system. To explain minorities' involvement in the criminal justice system, there are two trains of thoughts. Minorities engage in drug use or engage in crime more than whites, so they have a greater involvement in the criminal justice system. And the second idea is that the criminal justice system tends to treat racial and ethnic minorities differently than whites, which leads to a greater involvement in the system. I tend to lean toward the latter thought. And one thing I wanted to mention is a lot of times when the federal government does some of those countrywide surveys, when we look at those who engage in drug use, a lot of times across various different racial groups, we see similar types of substance use rates. So I wanted to quickly talk about two news articles that I found related to RED and treatment courts. And one was titled Drug Court Failing Black Offenders. There was a news story that was published back in 2016 based on a drug court in Texas. The court saw a decline in the number of Black participants. What was the reason for the decline? Defense lawyers stopped referring clients to drug court because they believed the program was difficult for poor and minority participants. Many didn't have transportation to get to appointments or did not have a flexible work schedule to keep up with the random drug tests and therapy appointments. One other quick news story, in Wisconsin, a drug court judge was looking around the courtroom and he saw something that didn't look right. There were a lot of white participants and not many people from minority backgrounds. Knowing that minorities were more likely to have a drug offense in this jurisdiction, the judge thought that the number enrolled in the drug court should be higher for racial and ethnic minorities. Then the court started to examine their eligibility criteria, and one thing they noted was the eligibility requirements excluded people who were considered high risk, and minorities were more likely to have extensive criminal histories, so they weren't given a chance to enter these programs. So the court needed to make changes to their eligibility criteria. We know from research that minorities graduate treatment court programs at a lesser rate than their white counterparts. This is one example of the disparities that exist in treatment courts. According to Painting the Picture, a national report on drug courts and other problem-solving courts in the US from 2016, there were 22 states or territories that had graduation rate data for African American participants, and there were 19 states or territories that had graduation rates for Hispanic participants. From this report, the author stated that 39% of African Americans graduated treatment court programs compared to 58% of overall graduates. Regarding Hispanics, 32% graduated compared to 57% of all the graduates. So this information was from 2016 report. So we hope that states are definitely tracking this information. So hopefully more courts will have this information so that we can get more accurate representation of those who are graduating these treatment court programs. Very quickly, I want to go over some of the research regarding RED. Some of the news articles I just referenced really highlighted some of these issues. Due to strict screening requirements, minorities are less likely granted access to these programs. Once enrolled into the programs, minorities have a hard time and they encounter hurdles in completing all the various different requirements. In one research study by John Gallagher, he does a lot of research qualitatively interviewing participants, and some participants that were from the African American group, they perceived that their sanctions were harsher than non-African American participants. And you can imagine the impact that it has on participants if they feel like they're being untreated fairly. That definitely will impact their willingness to continue to stay in the program or to, in the future, refer or recommend the program to some of their other friends who may be involved in the justice system. We also know, as mentioned a little earlier, that whites graduate these programs at a higher rate than non-whites. And I have Professor Ann Dannerbeck listed here, and she is from Missouri. And back in the late 1990s, she was doing some research on drug courts, and she found out that drug courts were doing much better than traditional probation, but anecdotally, she was hearing that people of color weren't doing as well in the program. So she decided to re-examine the data, and once she re-examined the data, she did find that there were some disparities in graduation rates in these programs. With regard to some of the data collection protocols, more than 1/5 of treatment courts aren't collecting information on the representation of their population regarding racial and ethnic background groups. And it also appears that some of the courts aren't doing evaluations by race or ethnicity. A research article from the 1990s highlighted that an African American in Kentucky was leading this program that used culturally sensitive protocols in a Kentucky drug court. And so when I was reading this article, I was wondering, who was this person, who was this counselor leading this program? And I reached out to the state of Kentucky, and they gave me the name of Daryl Turpin. I'm sure most of you know him. He is the co-creator of HEAT. So I definitely wanted him to be on the working committee because I believe from, late 1990s, he realized the importance of tailoring programming to cater to people from people of color. And then in another research study, African Americans wanted more staff of color because they believed that staff will be able to relate to them better. And then we also know that African Americans may not want to participate in some type of program such as NA or AA. They may want to reach out to other social supports, such as reaching out to a pastor. So here's the question. So why should drug or treatment courts care about racial and ethnic disparities? So there is a best practice standard on equity and inclusion. This standard recognizes that there are groups who have historically experienced discrimination due to their race, sex, religion, and other social characteristics. No matter what a person's background is, they should be able to succeed in treatment courts. This section of the standard goes into different topics like equivalent access, equivalent retention, equivalent treatment services, equivalent sanctions and incentives, and equivalent dispositions. And there's also a section on training for cultural biases. Now I want to jump into talking about the RED program assessment tool. We believe that this is a solution to help treatment courts address RED. So the RED program assessment tool is a secure web-based platform that has a series of closed and open-ended questions to capture information about treatment courts' operations and procedures, with an emphasis on examining areas where racial and ethnic disparities may exist. So we have 3 goals for the RED tool: to raise awareness about RED in treatment courts. Part of our journey was really to have an informal educational campaign to let treatment courts know that the RED tool is something that can be implemented in your program to examine where disparities may exist. And so we want to assist the user to identify RED in their system and processes, and then lastly, offer recommendations for courts to alleviate racial and ethnic inequities in their programs. So this tool is live. If you go to red2.ndcrc.org, your court can click this "Please contact us to register" link. And within 1 to 2 business days, we will set your court up with an ID and password. And we believe that this tool is usable for any treatment court that serves clients with an underlying substance use or mental health issue. All team members who attend regular staffing should be present during the completion of the tool. The tool will take up to about 2 hours to complete, but if a court can't finish in one sitting, the court can log back in at a later date to finish. So what's on the assessment? There are 8 different sections. As mentioned, there's open and closed-ended questions. Once the assessment is completed, treatment courts receive a score for each section minus the demographics. So the demographics has a lot of data entry questions. So that is the only section that isn't. And then at the very end, once you enter your responses, you will receive recommendations based on your entered responses. Let's give just a quick overview of the different sections. This section has multiple questions asking about, is racial and ethnic equity included in some of your court operational documents like a mission statement, vision statement, or staff and policy and procedure manual? And I will say, when we went to our pilot sites, and I'll talk about them a little later, a lot of them do not use this type of language in their operational documents. And this is definitely something that doesn't cost any money to make changes to these documents. And hopefully in the future, we will have some examples of a mission statement or a vision statement that has some of this language so that courts will be able to look at these sample documents and modify them for their courts. There's also a question about if your court has contact with non-English speaking participants, are you providing these participants information in their native language or a translator? So I think one of the issues is that people from non-English backgrounds want to make sure that they understand what's going on in the treatment court so that they can make decisions that may impact their future. So if you have a court, hopefully you are using some, if you have non-English speaking participants, hopefully you do have some translator or translating the materials in their native language. And I also would mention that I feel like some courts are starting to include racial, ethnic, equity, inclusion specialists on their teams, or maybe not just for the drug court, but for their criminal justice division. So in North Carolina, one of the Pallet Sites did have someone in this capacity, in this role. So I think this is definitely someone who could help with the policies and procedures if they're working on these issues already. The second section is on intake. And this section covers the referral process and eligibility requirements. Does the court have written eligibility requirements in writing? And if so, is the drug court sharing these eligibility requirements with all the various different referral agencies so that people could have, concrete information about who they can refer to the program? And then there's some questions on eligibility requirements. We ask things about, does a person need to have transportation? Do they need to be able to pay participant fees? And because we know people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they may not have a car, they may not be able to pay to be part of the program. So if those are requirements, you are excluding people that are disadvantaged. Then there's a section on assessment, and this section has questions on a substance use disorder, mental health, and a substance use disorder assessment. We want to make sure that courts are using these type of assessments to match people with the services that they need. We also want to make sure that staff are trained on using these assessments properly so that they can interpret the results and use these tools really as decision-making tools. As I mentioned, the demographic section, this is the one section that isn't scored. We have several data-related questions, and hopefully when courts are going through this, and if they aren't collecting some of this data, hopefully it will nudge them to start collecting this data in the future. And so, for example, one of the questions is, we want to ask, what is the racial and ethnic background of participants, that are currently in your program? So hopefully, courts are collecting this information so that they can, know, what is the representation of those in the program. And then we have a section on team members. This section has some questions regarding the racial and ethnic makeup of the team. As I mentioned earlier, we definitely want to make sure that teams are diverse, because some participants who are minorities, they do want team members that look like them. Also, there's questions on how educated or informed are team members about the cultural needs of the participants that they serve. So we want to make sure that team members are culturally informed so that they can make better decisions about the services that their participants are receiving. In the training section, there are two types of trainings that we look at. First, there's a racial and ethnic disparities training. And this is very broad. So something like this can be maybe your court has done maybe an implicit bias training as an example. And then we ask, has the court done any type of cultural competency training? And so a cultural competency training, something like this should look at teaching others to value people who are not from their backgrounds, to teach people that we all have differences and really to embrace differences and to realize that people from other groups may have different values and that we should still be respectful of their choices and beliefs. And then we also want to know, what agencies are providing these different training services. And then also, once you receive the training, did your court make any changes based on their recommendations following the training? And the drugs, treatment, and support services, this is the biggest section on the assessment. It covers a lot of information. And some of the topics include drugs of choice. So we want to know, are courts collecting information on the top drugs of choice for different racial and ethnic groups? Because we want to make sure that courts are having drug treatment services that cater to the drug use of their participants. We also look at things such as, are your counselors being trained in evidence-based practices? And we also want to have some questions on sanctions and incentives. One question I can think of is we want to make sure that courts do have a written schedule of sanctions and incentives and making sure that they share that with the participants. The last section is on evaluation and monitoring. We just want to make sure that courts are doing evaluations, and if so, are they doing it by race or ethnicity? And we also have some questions on, are you tracking those who graduate from the program or those who get terminated from the program? Just to know information about your population. We think that will be very useful as courts try to make improvements to their program. So once you go through all of those different sections, the courts will get a score. You'll get an overall score. So you can see here on the left side, the overall score was 50%. And so these scores for the overall score and the scores for each section, they will range from 0 to 100%. And I should note that once you complete this, if you were actually in the website, you would just scroll down and you would see the list of recommendations, and there will be recommendations for each section. And these recommendations are tied to the responses that your court entered. So you will recognize that these are tailored based on the responses that were entered in the different sections. So this is an important thing. We definitely have to talk about data security. So here at AU, we have an institutional review board. And this committee, they really look over research protocol just to make sure that we aren't doing anything unethical. And so we got an IRB approval from the university. We also should note that the data is secured on a secure server housed here at American University. And this assessment doesn't collect any individual level data, and data will only be reported in the aggregate, so in summary form, so that we can maybe present or use this information for different publications. So I wanted to spend some time talking about the RED pilot site. So we were able to test this tool in Missouri, North Carolina, and Louisiana. So 3 sites from these various states. And these site visits really were an opportunity for us to receive feedback on the tool. We wanted to make sure that this was a tool that practitioners would be able to use. So really looking at, is it user-friendly and is it useful for their operations? And so part of these site visits, we conducted interviews, observed status hearings, attended staffings, and provided recommendations to address RED. I want to spend just a few seconds highlighting some of the findings that arose from the observations on the site visits. So for each court, we wrote a short memo of some of the things that we found and also offered some suggestions. And so, for example, one of the things that we noted for some of the courts were they were having low referrals for people of color to the treatment court. That was a concern for some of the interviewees. So we suggested that courts closely work with stakeholders to describe the benefits and success of the program. Also to start marketing their program, such as maybe publishing a newsletter that shows some data showing the benefits of the treatment courts. Also examining the various different eligibility requirements to find out what factors are negatively impacting or excluding people of color. Then make adjustments to increase program entry. Another concern was low graduation rates for minorities. So African-American participants were graduating these programs at lower rates than their white counterparts. So we suggested, maybe try having a focus group with maybe, 6 African-American participants who have been successful in the program over the past couple of years to find out what in the program worked or did not work for them. Hearing the successes and challenges of these various different participants would give the court kind of an idea of how they can offer support to current participants to help them graduate these programs. There's also was an issue for the need for more training. The interviewee stated the need for training on topics such as cultural competency and reducing racial and ethnic disparities. So having opportunities for team members to participate in these types of training will allow them to learn more about factors that contribute to racial and ethnic disparities in treatment courts. And this was a big issue that a lot of the different interviewees mentioned, was transportation being an issue, that having access to transportation was really a big requirement to be in these programs. And so several team members mentioned that the lack of transportation for minority participants was an issue, and it excluded many of them from even having an opportunity to participate in the program. Because we know that participants, they need reliable transportation to make frequent appointments. And so just some suggestions that we did offer some of the courts, because we know in the US, some courts are using technology such as video conferencing to conduct virtual court appearances. Also offering participants in the program who have a driving license to chauffeur other participants around as a community service credit. Also, there's things such as using telemedicine for different therapy appointments, and then also using your agency funds to hire a part-time bus or van driver to bring people to their different appointments. And then just one of the courts mentioned that they needed more training on incentives and sanctions. So there needs to be kind of more understanding of the process for sanctions and incentives so that they are used in a fair and just manner. And so we gave every court a site visit report with their score and their recommendations. And we also let them know that if they needed any other type of help from us to reach out, we also gave them resources that some of our different collaborative partners have created. So we know that NADCP, they have their Equity and Inclusion Toolkit. We provided people with that information. We also know that CCI has on their treatmentcourse.org, they have some online modules on cultural competency. They also have some modules on the HEAT program. So in this website or in this report, we also provided them with those resources so that they can make changes to their program. On this website, we just have the average scores for the 3 different pilot sites. We can see that the overall score is 65%. One of the lowest was the team members. And I should mention that this is only 3 sites, but we hope that once we have more, greater or a bigger sample size, that we'll be able to kind of share information on kind of a more accurate representation of what these scores should look like. Because right now, the scores are really based on an ideal program. So in the future, as I mentioned, once we get more courts to participate, we definitely will be letting people know more what is an accurate score. I just want to reiterate this, one more time, that so courts, we definitely will not share, these scores with anyone. The only people that will have access to this is the court, obviously, and then just the research team. And as I mentioned earlier, whenever we talk about these scores, it would always be like this in summary. We'll never pinpoint one particular court, but it'll be in aggregate form. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Leola Abraham, and she's going to talk about the RED communication strategy.
Hi, everyone. So as if I said, I'm Leola Abraham. I am the Associate Director of Communications here at the Justice Programs Office. And I'm going to talk with you about our communication strategy. So as you've seen and heard from Preeti and Zephi, there's been a lot of work to put this RED program assessment tool together and to develop it. And so obviously, once we completed the tool, we wanted to really think about how to communicate about it and how to really raise awareness. So we put together a goal. We were trying to figure out, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And essentially our overarching goal for this program is to raise awareness and visibility about the tool itself, about racial and ethnic disparities in general, but more specifically about the tool. So that's the overarching goal of the communications plan. And then in terms of the objectives that would help support that goal or achieve that goal, we wanted to create or essentially identify at least 5 treatment courts over the period of August through November to start to take the assessment so that we can start to actually get some data into the system. And I can tell you that we've already achieved that. We already have 5 courts that have put their hand up to participate. So we're really happy about that. And obviously, as we continue the communications campaign, we'll look to include more courts. We also wanted to really try to gain at least 2 solid media stories in trade media. And we were looking at things like the American Bar Association Journal, Courthouse News, Law 360, The Appeal, and some of the wires like AP and Reuters, etc. And then finally, we were working on having more engagement online, so having digital engagement to, again, as part of raising awareness and visibility. And so we have a target of having at least 10 measured, really proactive engagement on our social media channels. And the Justice Programs Office is involved both on Twitter and Facebook, and we have really active social media channels. So the overarching strategy here is, we said to ourselves, okay, what are we trying to achieve in terms of the goals and objectives? And then we said, well, how are we going to achieve it? And so we wanted to start with a really soft launch to make sure all of the bits of technology worked within the tool. And so we did that on August 6th. We had a soft launch. And we started to, have some targeted outreach to inviting treatment courts to participate. So we used our networks and our contacts to reach out to courts around the country. And to be quite honest, there were courts that were actually reaching out to us, wanting to participate. Yes, including some international ones as well. We're not quite there yet in the international space. And we, as Preeti mentioned, we presented at the NADCP conference, and there was a lot of interest and engagement in wanting to participate and use this tool. We also have engaged in some targeted stakeholder outreach. So we're working with all of our allies and organizations and subject matter expert, and working with them to help build awareness, to share the information. I've put a media packet together, a marketing packet together, which I'll share with you in a little bit, that you can essentially take the language, take the visual, and send it out to your networks. We're also working on pitching to trade media, as I mentioned earlier, so that we can continue to build the visibility in the external space, in the news. And as I mentioned earlier, I put the marketing package together, which has all of the materials, is essentially a one-stop shop for your communications, for the communications about this particular tool. So then the next question we were asking ourselves is, so what are we trying to achieve? How will we achieve it? And what is it what's the story that we're trying to tell? And so essentially, you've heard some of it earlier, but I'll essentially recap. The story that we're trying to tell, or the narrative thread that we're trying to convey, is that racial and ethnic disparities in policing practices, arrest and conviction rates, sentencing norms, and incarceration trends have historically had a negative impact on racial and ethnic minorities. racial and ethnic disparities in the justice system remain an issue today. There's no question about that. Research has shown that diversion programs such as treatment courts are an effective solution to helping justice-involved individuals get on the path to recovery. The programs offer participants interventions and may lead to lower recidivism rates. However, trends and data show that disparities may and do exist in terms of who has access to the programs, in terms of completion rates and in terms of recidivism outcomes. Treatment courts have experienced racial and ethnic disparities in the program outcomes where, for example, minorities graduate programs at a lesser rate than their white counterparts. That's a very key message. And we know the treatment courts are taking proactive approaches to, in researching and eliminating racial and ethnic disparities in their courtrooms to essentially mitigate this issue in terms of racial and ethnic disparities. However, our team over a number of years and working with having the 3 different site visits that we mentioned, and in developing this tool, we developed a tool to help treatment courts professionals identify and examine areas where racial and ethnic disparities may exist in their courtrooms. And so that's the purpose of the tool, as if I went over earlier, is to really help the treatment court team and the professionals in that team identify and examine the areas and have those conversations about where those disparities are, existing in their courtrooms, and how to then therefore mitigate those disparities with the recommendations that the program is providing. So top line, the things you should know about the RED program assessment tool is that it's free, it's user-friendly. We built a really user-friendly platform. It uses a really secure and confidential web-based platform. It's really a comprehensive assessment for treatment court programs. We have 8 sections of questions, so it's really thorough, it's really comprehensive. And it provides recommendations that your teams can use to start implementing and start mitigating some of the disparities that exist or may exist in the courtroom. So now that we've sort of unpacked the story and we've got some key messages, we are trying to figure out, okay, so who are we trying to tell this story to? And so we've come up with, a very long list of audiences to reach out to and to raise awareness within. So we wanted to sort of stagger that in terms of the communications implementation. So obviously treatment court professionals, state courts, veteran service organizations, recovery community leaders, and as I mentioned earlier, allies, organizations, and subject matter experts. Dr. John Gallagher worked with us to develop the RED issue brief, and so he would be one of the first people I'd want to go to and have a conversation with and say, and it's an area that he is, closely involved with. So, here's this database, here's this tool that we've developed. Would you be willing to help us share the information in terms of raising awareness? I mentioned earlier too that, obviously we're going to be targeting and looking at media and trade media. We're obviously sharing the information. We've already had conversations with the School of Public Affairs and the AU community, and trying to reach both our internal AU community, but the broader general public. And then later on, as we progress in our communication strategy, and we get some real data in looking at policymakers, legislators, federal agency, and even law enforcement. So now that we know who we're trying to reach, the next question is, what do we have and what materials can we use to reach them? So we have this is a package of really robust materials that we've been developing over a period of time. We obviously have the RED Program Assessment Tool website, which is again a user-friendly, very intuitive website. We have the issue brief that we mentioned. We've developed an online tutorial that we'll be releasing very soon that Zephi worked on. And we also have in the works a podcast that's under development as well. So we'll have this package of materials and products that we can use to continue to build awareness. We also have, in terms of materials for communicating about the tool, we've got graphics we've developed, we've got content we've developed, we've got, as part of the launch, we've been putting out articles in newsletters and blogs and a social media campaign that runs through November, and a lot of promotional materials that's all packaged together in one place so that my team can use it and anyone who is who wants it can have access to it. I've made it super easy. And I've even got like some key messages and facts, etc. So that's all ready to go and to be distributed. And this is an example of what the marketing package looks like. I've written out the key message for you. I've got all the links to the key websites and materials. I've even pre-written the Facebook and Twitter posts and hashtags that folks can use. Here's an example of some graphics. We've just got some new ones we developed as well. And any court that participates, we also really, would love for them to give us a testimonial. And these are some examples of testimonials that are already on the site. And so getting close to the end here, we said, okay, we know what we want to, we know who we want to reach. We know what we want to tell them, or we want them to know. We know the materials that we can use, and then looking at what are the different channels. We've got our own internal Justice Programs Office and NDCRC and AU channels, newsletters, websites, social media, listservs, blogs, and of course, reaching out to our partners as well to, again, help us share the information. So I'm going to stop here and hand it back over to Zephi.
Well, we are so thankful that we had an opportunity to present to the state coordinators. We really see the state coordinators as being our partners, and we hope that states would really push out this tool for us. And if you know a court in your state or territory that is dealing with RED and they want to improve, we hope that you would share this with them, as I mentioned. Also, feel free to have them email us. I think, we definitely are available to do very quick, less than 30-minute a webinar with courts, and they can invite their whole team to come and learn about the tool. We really have this out here just to help people, and we think it definitely will be beneficial to the field. And once we get data, hopefully we'll be able to publish some papers and definitely present on this tool. We really think it will be helpful for various different treatment courts. And I know that some states have various different processes that they make drug courts go through to be certified. So maybe some state coordinators would even consider making this tool as part of that certification process. So with that, I think I'm gonna stop there and turn it back over to CCI and see if you have any questions.
Thanks, Zephi. We just sent an email to all the coordinators and all the participants to see if they have any questions. So feel free to chat your questions, and we will share them with Preeti, Leola, and Zephi.
We had a question come up here, which was, Zephi or Preeti, can you speak to how often would you recommend that a court take the assessment?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So when you complete the assessment and you try to go back in, it will tell you that you can't even retake it until 6 months later, but we would recommend that courts take it on an annual basis once they've had an opportunity to implement some of the recommendations that the tool suggested. So definitely on an annual basis, I think that would be kind of a good starting point for courts.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, it looks like we wrapped up a little earlier than planned, which I hope that you all aren't disappointed by. If you do have additional questions, feel free to reach out to us here at the center, and we will make sure the team at AU will get those questions and respond to your questions. Just to let you all know, there was some interest in having Aaron Arnold, who's the Director of Technical Assistance here at the center, present in the next webinar, which will be on constitutional law and drug courts. He has agreed to do so, so we will be reaching out to you guys and letting you know when that webinar will be set up. Preeti, Zephi, do you guys have any additional comments that you want to make before we wrap up?
Yeah, so we just have want to mention on our website, RED tool, DCRC, we do have some other resources on there. So for example, a glossary of terms. So if you want to familiarize yourself with some of the terms on the, also we have a Q&A on that page as well. So maybe you have a question that you think about later, you can go to that website first to look at the Q&A, and hopefully your answer will be answered there. And as always, feel free to reach out to us at ndcrc@american.edu to ask us any future questions. And Preeti, I think you wanted to say something?
No, I just wanted to thank CCI and BJ for this opportunity to present to all the state coordinators. It's really nice to have, everyone together at one spot and just, present this tool to y'all. And if you have any suggestions or anything, any comments, and we're always looking to improve and add more resources to the site. So if you see anything you want us to include, or if you see a question that's not answered, send it to us, something that would make things a little bit clearer, please just reach out to us. We can, work on that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We appreciate you guys taking the time to be a part of the webinar. We will be in touch with you all soon for the next webinar schedule. We hope you all have a great week, and we'll speak with you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.